All right, we're live. Welcome everybody to the Mr. Postman podcast. I'm Trevor Thielen. I'm joined here by Justin Hatt. How's it going, Justin?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yep, I actually had two people kind of drop off. We're gonna have to reschedule them, but I'm glad you took the opportunity to be on, and I'm kind of excited to have you on, honestly.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited. Never done this before, so this is a new experience for me.
Yeah, it can be a little different, but Justin, you're classically trained on guitar, and you went to college for that. So, why don't you tell my viewers or your viewers as well, and kind of what that's like?
Yeah, sure. So, I recently just graduated, so I'm, fairly new to being out in the music scene, and I did 2 years at a community college, and then I transferred to a 4-year college where I essentially finished my training. I did study classical guitar. It was quite an undertaking, a lot of work, but it paid off a lot, and it was a lot of fun, and I've definitely learned a lot of skills that I may not have learned if I hadn't attended. So it was definitely quite an experience, and my experience isn't over yet.
Yeah, and because I've taken some music classes, would you recommend that to people that are trying to go into college to do music? Because I know it's kind of met with a little bit of what are you doing going into music? But I think there's a lot more out there than people expect when you go into it.
Yeah, sure. So I can definitely testify to that because I do come from a family that's not musically inclined. I'm the first graduate of my family that's ever had a music degree. So I can definitely speak on behalf of this. So one of the biggest things to consider is you don't have to go to an institution to do music. You can be a successful musician by learning your own and teaching yourself. But I found the best way that I could progress at a rapid rate was by attending a institution, by trying to learn as much information as I can. But by no means do you have to go to a music school to be successful in music and do music. I just thought that it worked the best for me. But I have worked with a lot of talented musicians in my time that have never gone to an institution and are really, really good musicians at what they do.
Right. Yeah. And I know. I've been in quite a few bands over the years, and every once in a while you will run into people such as yourself that have been to school to do this stuff, and it's almost intimidating in a way because it's like, okay, this person knows so much more than me. It can be kind of weird but it's really nice. It's a nice asset to have when you're coming into a band and you want to do something like that.
I would agree. I think when I first started out, before I even was in college for it or school, and I was like in high school, I had never actually taken like a music theory class or a course, and I was working with some groups where I felt like I was intimidated because the musicians around me were trained really well and they knew their stuff. And I was definitely nervous about that, but I took that in as a good thing because working with them, I learned probably a lot more than I would have if I didn't pursue playing with other people. So it can come as an intimidation thing, but I believe though also you can really learn a lot from that and take it as a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Now, I know when I first was going to college, I kind of thought, okay, when I get out of high school and when I get out of college, I kind of want to own my own recording studio. And it's really tough when you first get into it because you don't know anything about anything, and you're thinking, okay, what's the next step? And my thought was, okay, I'm gonna go to college and kind of look into it. And honestly, it was a little different because I found out the more I went to college, the more a lot of these people don't go to college for it. But I mean, it is, I would say, a good experience, honestly, because I think you do meet a lot of people that are going to push you in the right direction.
Right. I certainly agree with that as well. I think as we progress in a time where we're more connected by the internet and you can look up things on YouTube and how-to videos are a huge thing. You can look up anything on YouTube and find how do I set up a decent recording studio or how to set up, recording for a beginner. And the good thing about that is basically anybody who's anybody can get into this type of pursuit and do it. Whereas there was once a time where you would have to go to a guy who knew how to record. And now we have the ability to do it right at our fingertips where anybody can do this.
Right. And even when I went to school, a lot of my instructors had told me that they're just now kind of beginning to understand the digital aspect of this rather than going from reel to reel tape and having to cut through it. And it's like, because back then it was a lot harder. Now anybody can grab a computer. They can go buy Pro Tools. They can get Reaper, get a mic, and then boom, you're ready to go.
Right, and I think, again, that's a good thing now because there's more, as a connected world that we're in, I think people think that it's more of a competition with one another because anybody can put their content online, which is true in that regard. But in the same sense, we're at an advantage because since we now have the ability to do that, we can record anything that's original content and we can get it seen by a lot more people than we could if it was, in the olden times. I mean, think of the Beatles, for example. Their big breakthrough was when they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and that was, their YouTube platform, I suppose you could say, or their Instagram platform. As to nowadays, anybody can post anything, and again, you can see it.
Right, and it seems like back then, you really had to catch the attention of somebody in the higher ups, unless you had a lot of money. Even if you had a lot of money, it's not a guarantee. You could go out and make a record. You can go out and play it and give it to people, but there's no guarantee, especially back then, that anyone would even want to hear it. And if you didn't come out with something good, then you're not going to get on something like the Ed Sullivan Show ever.
Right, and there are, there are a lot of big time artists nowadays that are in the mainstream light that started out in this way. Think of like Ed Sheeran, for example. He's, obviously huge, and he started out just recording and putting things out there, and then people saw that, and now he's like one of the biggest pop stars in the world. And he used to just travel around, the UK, and he would, put his toiletries in his guitar gig bag, and he'd walk around, and then now look where he is now. And there's other artists that have also done that. Mac DeMarco of like the indie stream. I mean, he just started recording, putting stuff up there, and now he's like a huge indie artist. Billie Eilish, for example, is another one. Her and her brother recorded all the stuff right from their home, and now she's a huge pop star as well.
And how much of that do you attribute to luck, and how much would you attribute to, because there's a lot of good musicians out there that seem to almost never get their break because of the oversaturation of the media nowadays.
I would definitely agree with that. I think one thing you have to understand is really trying to separate yourself from what everybody else is doing. So some of those artists that I named, like Ed Sheeran or Mac DeMarco or Billie Eilish for that, if you take one thing from each of those artists, they have something that they do that's different among a lot of other artists. So, whether Mac DeMarco started bringing back in like these, effects that we haven't heard of, since like the 70s and 80s, which people are really digging that sound. Billie Eilish with how she has this weird kind of like dark, scary music that's interesting, but yet really, really cool to listen to. And then like Ed Sheeran making the acoustic guitar sound a lot more full than just an accompanying instrument. So you take these artists and you look at the takeaway from them, and they have separated themselves out from the mainstream media by being able to differentiate themselves by doing something that they do well at and then executing that and making themselves big on that thing that they're really good at.
Right, and I've noticed more and more the younger generations coming up, the kids that are really, really buying the music, the 15-year-old, 16, 17-year-old kids out there. I've been seeing a lot more of a trend where they're not listening to even bands anymore. Do you think that's something that could possibly almost wave out eventually?
Yeah, I could see that definitely being something to consider. I mean, not to continue to talk about Mac DeMarco, but this guy has come out with 3 studio albums, and he has recorded every single part to it: the guitars, the lead guitar, the bass, the vocals, the drums. This is one man that records all those individual parts, and then when he plays live, he brings in all the bands, all his bandmates to actually play it, so he has the ability to play it at a live show. I think with the recording aspect is now you don't necessarily have to bring in other musicians to help finish your track, where you can just do it yourself. You can lay the groundwork, and you really have the ability to manipulate the piece of music that you're working on and really make it your own, because you can basically do it yourself, and instead of telling this person that you're working with that you want to get this sound, you can just do it yourself, which is a really cool ability to do that we once never had. You'd have to hire a studio musician to fill in the work, and you might not necessarily agree with how that track is being laid down. Now you can do it yourself.
And as a musician that has done that in a way, I've played with a 2-man band, and you get met with a lot of either they love it or they hate it. because especially without having a drummer or without having like a lead guitarist or something like that, and you're not a pop musician, it can be kind of confusing. It's some ground that you go into and you're really not sure where to go from there. It's uncharted almost in a way.
Yeah, it is, but in the same regard, though, it's something that's interesting. It's something that's new, and that's what sets you apart from maybe other parties of musicians. Like, now you see a big thing now on social media is a lot of looper musicians that loop. They play all the different parts and they loop it on a track, and they go out and play all these different songs, and it's as if they had a full band, and they also, bring in the drums. They have like midis and all these different effects. And again, that's something that's really cool because that's something that never existed at one point.
Yeah, and I think you're gonna start seeing music really take off in a way that you've never seen it before, which, and that's how it's always been. I mean, I'm sure back in the day when it was Beethoven. Nobody expected to see these people come out and sing obviously they'll sing, but nothing like, they didn't have microphones back then.
Right.
And it's something that really like, it progresses and it progresses, and it's almost unrecognizable to people back then. And who knows what it's going to be like 100 years from now.
Right. I think you're going to continue to see artists really push the envelope and really achieve things that necessarily weren't, achievable at their time. I mean, you mentioned like Beethoven. I mean, Beethoven was the first composer of the classical era that brought in a full chorus on his Ninth Symphony, which is the Ode to Joy Symphony. That was the first time that, a composer actually ever brought in a full-on chorus to sing as a part of a symphony, and people were probably like, whoa, what is this guy doing? This is not the standard classical way to compose a symphony. But he pushed the envelope, and now we recognize that as one of the most recognizable melodies of all time.
Yeah, it's always so tough because when you first do something new, you're always going to be met with that, hey man, what are you doing? You're not supposed to do it this way. I mean, it's almost like sometimes you wonder how long it's going to take for that to catch on, and it's almost unfair to these musicians that really are pushing the envelope, and then boom, 20 years down the road, and it's finally catching on, and they're pretty much done with, and it's like, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say it's unfair, but it's a harsh reality in the music world sometimes.
I agree. I think there are, instances of, musicians that we know really well that have sold more music or have been recognized more because of their death. One that comes to mind is an artist, Mac Miller. So, not that I was a huge Mac Miller fan by any means, but when he passed away, it seemed that he just started selling even more records, and everybody kind of got on the bandwagon, and they're like, okay, this guy pushed the envelope of, what he did as iconic rap. But yet, during his lifetime, he wasn't as recognized as he was when he passed away. So that's something as well.
That's almost something. You see that a lot. You saw that with Kurt Cobain. I mean,
oh yeah, entirely.
I mean, that's what really, really got grunge to where it's at. I mean, not that it wasn't popular at the time, but now it's like people are still imitating Kurt Cobain. People are still imitating Tupac. People are still imitating all these people that died. It's almost in a way that people's death brings on like this whole new wave of music.
Yeah, it's almost like people who really inspiring musicians, their death leaves on a longer legacy than their actual music did when they were actually alive.
Yeah. That is very interesting. So I guess I should ask you what actually got you into music when you first started playing?
Sure. So the music for me, as I mentioned before, I didn't come from a musical family, so it's not like I had musical inspiration from my family saying, hey, you should do this. I love the Beatles, and I always have loved the Beatles. And I got to the point where it's like, I really want to see if I can be able to play their music. And, I see these guys do these covers, and I'm like, the guitar can't be that hard. Come on. It's the people's instrument. It's not that difficult. Well, turns out it wasn't as easy as I thought, but I definitely put in the man hour and the work to do it. But I would say the Beatles is my number one influence when it came to picking up the guitar and getting going, and why I wanted to play was to be able to play Beatles tunes.
Yeah, and honestly, to be honest, I didn't get into the Beatles until very recently, but when I did, I was thinking, how could I have ever passed this up? And these guys are some really, really good musicians that they do some things in their music that you don't realize until you look it up. They slowed down their music, they reversed their music, and these guys were like one of the first people to do that.
Right. And I want to make this clear as well, because we talked about earlier about having to go to music school to try to do music. So Beatles, obviously one of the most iconic bands. You can never argue that. None of the Beatles read music.
Yeah, I just seen that. I was watching an interview with Paul McCartney. He was talking about how he didn't really know much about piano, but he still made so many great songs on piano.
Amazing music, and it just goes to show, if you have the motivation, you have the passion, you have the drive, and you have that spark, you can create some beautiful stuff, and you don't necessarily need to know all this. Knowing music theory certainly does help. Not to say that you shouldn't go out and try to learn it. But with that being said, you take the band like the Beatles that wrote all this awesome music, and the fact that they didn't ever read music and they didn't really know much about music theory speaks volumes about the music that they wrote.
Yeah, and it's almost like, do you think there ever will be another band like that? Because I've thought about it time and time again, and I just can't seem to think that there could ever be a band so influential and who could put out song after song and just put hit after hit after hit, and then, never really fall off.
I think bands will come close, but I don't think they'll ever pass them. I don't think in this lifetime, I don't think in this planet, I don't think that you'll ever meet a duo as good as Paul McCartney and John Lennon. I think that is something that, again, people will come close. And I'm not to say that there's not really good bands that are out there nowadays, but I don't think anyone will ever be able to surpass the Beatles. And if one day they do, then I guess they'll have to prove me wrong on that. But I don't think in this lifetime.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I could not think of any band that I would really compare to the Beatles. A lot of people will put out their comparisons, and you go through and listen to it, and you think, okay, maybe it comes close, but it's almost, they were so unique. Right. In the way that they wrote, that you just don't see that anymore.
Right, and now too, since they have led such this long-lasting legacy, when you hear bands that come out with music, I often find myself listening to this piece and I said, that's Beatles influence right there. Mm-hmm. That came from the Beatles. Yep. Hands down.
And I just heard a song today, the Eagles' death metal, "Wanna Be in LA." If you listen to that, there's some clear Beatles influence, whether they liked it or not. Right. There was definitely some influence there.
Right. I don't think, again, I think you're gonna listen to music and they'll say, okay, they're almost like a Beatles copycat. Yeah. It's going to be so hard for a band to be able to differentiate themselves and to be able to do something so entirely new and fresh that hasn't been done. Not to say that you can't, again, come close.
And I think some people will find that lane, but really what it's going to take, if anybody out there watching this right now ever wants to become another Beatles or something similar or influential, you're going to have to put down your instruments and think, okay, I'm going to have to do something really, really uncomfortable writing-wise, something that's never been done. And that's the biggest problem I've seen, is you'll try to do that, and I think people kind of look at you like, well, that's definitely not right. And of course, it's not probably right musically. It won't make sense at first, but I think you can find a way to make it make sense.
Right. One takeaway from school that I learned is you learn all this music theory, you learn all these sets amount of rules that you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this at these given times. You learn all of that just to go out and break those rules.
Yeah, you break them quite a bit. And I think I've broken them a lot, and I think the songs where I do break the rules are the ones that I think were my best songs. Yeah, and I think it's true for most people.
I definitely agree with that. I think when you eliminate those barriers and say, okay, I can't do this because that's what music theory tells me I shouldn't do. I think when you eliminate those barriers, you can start to create a lot more unique harmonies, melodies, leads. You have the abilities to do that.
So I did want to talk to you a little bit about some of the gigs you've been doing. I know that if you sign up on your website, you can actually be kind of informed about some of the stuff you've been doing. So why don't you tell everyone about some of the gigs that you've got coming up and some of the gigs you've already played?
Yeah, sure. So, along the lines of trying to do things, differently and trying to, get my music out there, one of the best places that I have really hit up and I've had some decent success with, as well as getting paid for playing music, is assisted living homes. So what's really interesting is, a lot of these places, they're in all major cities. There's tons of, assisted living care facilities for senior citizens, memory care patients. You contact these places and you hit them up and you say, hey, would you be interested in me in playing music for an hour on like a Saturday or a Sunday evening or whatever? And probably about 95% of the time, the people are in love with the idea. They're like, oh my gosh, yes, we'd love to have music. I'm sure our residents would love that. So that's what I've been doing. I've been playing a lot of, assisted living care facilities, and I actually have one coming up next week. I play for like an hour and I get paid, like $50 to do it. And it's a really good feel good, gig because I'm getting satisfaction out of it as being a working musician to go out and play music and get paid for it. But then you're also leaving those, people there with a very, very good impression. A lot of these people, they might not have family anymore because they've outlived their family, or, family might not necessarily visit them. So if I can give them, a little bit of an enjoyment for an hour out of the week, that's a really good feeling. I also do, I have an upcoming fundraiser event that I'm playing at. It's at a wine tasting event. So, sometimes I'll get invited to do some of those types of gigs for like, more, I don't want to say like ritzy ditzy, but more like upscale type venues where, it's not necessarily like a house show or something like that.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like people almost lose sight of what they're playing music for to begin with.
No.
I think it is really nice to get paid for gigs. I mean, I've played plenty of gigs where I've gotten paid quite a bit.
For sure.
And I played gigs where I went out to Detroit and I played and no money.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's still important to be able to do that. I think some bands, even especially bigger bands, like once you get more established,
mm-hmm.
they're more against the idea of just playing for fun.
Yeah, I think, a lot of musicians that are trying to do this are definitely trying to make a career out of it. And, you have to have obviously several different, sources of income to try to do this as a working musician and trying to do music as a career. But for me, once in a while, if I go out and play and I don't necessarily get paid, but I always think of it as if I'm not getting monetarily paid, I'm getting paid in exposure. So that's one thing to think of. Exposure is everything. So, and word of mouth is everything. So if I go out to a gig and I don't necessarily get paid a lot, or I get paid nothing, the takeaway from that is I can, at least hand some people my business cards, or I can tell them about my website, or, say, hey, check me out here, call me back. Here's my number, and if you have the ability to do that, you're still getting paid. Maybe not in a monetary sense, but you're getting paid in exposure, which is a really, really important thing. And also to consider, when we decided to do music, it's because we wanted to do it because we wanted to have fun and we enjoy it and we love making music. So that's something you have to always remember too, is ground yourself, because you can't always just think, okay, well, I have to go out and make money and do this. You have to remember that you're doing this because you have a passion for it and you love it.
Right. That's something that is very easy to forget, especially the further you get into it. And I've been in bands. I've been in one signed band, and that was probably the least amount of fun I've ever really had because they want you to go hit the road, and we never ended up doing that. But I think it can be it can be a testament to how strong your will is to actually do this, and it can really put you in a position to think, okay, is this really what I want to do? And of course, some people aren't ready for it. I was definitely to the point where I wanted to do it, but I think it can be a little bit stressful, and like you said, with funding it can be kind of stressful too, because you got to be available.
Right. And
that's something that I've learned over the years, that I've had to take jobs that I didn't want to take just so I could play. Right.
But, we do it because we love music, and that's our passion, and we will stop at nothing to continue to do that. And I think that's really admirable. I mean, there are so many bad things that you can get involved in nowadays, really negative, it's a negative world out there, and the fact that we're driven to do something that really brings satisfaction to us, I think pays out way more than it does to just sit in a job that you work a 9 to 5. You make decent money, but you're not satisfied in doing it, and you feel like, I'm wasting my time here. What's my purpose? For me, and I'm sure for you as well, when you do music and you create it, you're like, yeah, this is my purpose.
Yeah, I feel like some people can see that, and they'll look in and not really understand what we're thinking, and stuff like this is kind of nice because I do like to get musicians on the show and talk about our side of the story.
Yeah.
Because we don't get to do that. We can sometimes talk about when we're in interviews. If we're to be in a band and have an interview, we're more busy talking about pushing a product. But it is nice to be able to have an outlet to tell people, okay, this is why I'm doing it, because I think sometimes people get confused as to why we are doing it.
Right. And I think, musicians are people too, just like anybody else. And, even though we work in like the entertainment industry or the creative industry, we at the end of the day, we're still humans like everybody else. We still have emotions, and, we are pushing products like that, and we do have to market ourselves. And it feels like we have to, sometimes be almost fake in a sense, like, here, buy my product so that I can, survive.
Yeah. And I've definitely been, lately I've been in kind of a pushing marketing kind of, thing. I've been pushing in my new releases, and it gets very taxing. Sometimes you just want to go out there and play, and it's not something that we as musicians want to be doing 24/7. I don't like when people look into the music side of things and think, okay, these people just want to sell me a product. It's much more than that. I think we're trying to sell an idea more than a product.
Right. I think, you're trying to evoke an emotion, or, tell a story, this song that I wrote, or, this piece that I'm playing, what is the purpose of it? What am I trying to make the listener feel, or, what am I trying to convey in the story?
Right. And I would really, yeah, you really want to do that. And I think a lot of the times, especially with what I've been doing lately, I've been focusing on a lot of positivity, and I want to put more positivity out into the world. And unfortunately, that means you have to sell, or you have to push a product. Even if it's free, you still have to push a product. Now, going into something that is almost similar to this, you do have a YouTube channel that this will probably be going up on.
Yeah.
And so why don't you tell everyone about what you have going on there?
Sure. So, yeah, we talked about marketing. So I think, being a musician, you have to really be good at marketing yourself, getting yourself on social media, trying to connect with your inner niche in your community and your surrounding area. So I do have a YouTube channel. I do try to post on it pretty regularly. I've been trying to get into the spin of doing a weekly upload. If I can do that, then I'm being successful. But I do have a YouTube where I do post cover videos of solo arrangements. I have been doing some pop songs. I actually uploaded one today, which was a solo arrangement for The Police, Every Breath You Take.
Yep, and I was just about to look at that before it came
Yeah,
up too.
so I have recorded that. I do post a lot more practice sessions and more raw video footage on my Instagram, but the cleaner videos I do post up on YouTube, definitely.
Do you find it hard to market things on YouTube? Just the way that YouTube's set up. I find it's easier on Facebook, rather, because the ads you can target. YouTube, right. I feel, is a little different.
YouTube can be difficult in that sense, because what's really stressful about YouTube is, let's say you spend 2.5 hours of recording, a 3-minute video, and you after you're done recording, you edit it, you put it up there, and it gets 60 views. Mm-hmm. All of that work, it's like, okay, if I was working at a job for 2 hours, I could probably come home with a decent amount of money, right? Well, I'm not making much money on 60 views. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely is hard to get out there and get seen because YouTube is so flooded. So I have found success with Facebook as well, because I do, once I post content on, social media like YouTube, I will make sure that I post it to like Instagram, my Snapchat, and YouTube, so that I have other or Facebook, so that we have other sources of traffic coming to that video.
Right, and it's something you really have to stay up on, too. Content is king on YouTube, and not just on YouTube, but basically everything. I've noticed bands will take a break, they'll take a hiatus, say, okay, for the winter we're going to start writing. You almost can't do that anymore. You almost have to keep putting out new content, even if it's not music. You got to
Right.
take a picture of the band. You got to put out an interview. You got to do all this stuff. That can be a little exhausting for the artist, it seems.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. It seems that if you're not posting regularly, people will leave your channel. They'll leave the support.
Yep.
So in order to keep the momentum of the channel growing, or getting more traffic to what you're doing, you have to be consistent. That's why people follow people. That's why people subscribe to people, because they're looking for that consistency, saying, okay, I expect to have a piece of content at least once a week, so I'm getting value out of following this person. And that's the big thing about social media is why do we follow people on Instagram? Why do we have friends with people on Facebook? Because we value the content that they put on there, whether it's a status update, a picture, seeing what they're up to. We value that person. And that's something that when you're marketing yourself, you have to leave value for the person that subscribes to you or is checking you out.
And I know I have some issues with keeping content up, because I'm putting out a podcast every week, and I'm obviously just getting started on this, but then I have to think, okay, next week I'm going to have to do two, and I'm going to have so and so on, and I'm gonna have to get a hold of them and find their schedule. It can be very, very hard to do, and you almost have to get very creative in the way that you make your content. And like I said before, it can be pretty tolling.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think social media has definitely come at a plus, where again you can share a lot more content with people, but in the same regard, it's like, oh, now I have to really make even more content to satisfy these content devouring freaks.
Yeah, and speaking of that, a little bit of a side thing here. Spotify is a big thing for artists, and it almost came out of nowhere. I remember when Spotify was first starting, and no one really used Spotify. It was all iTunes, but now iTunes is starting to go away, and Apple Music is coming up, and Spotify. I feel like some of these artists are I don't feel this. I know a lot of these artists feel ripped off by getting only fractions of a cent per stream. Do you think that this could possibly be a trend where the artists are going to fight back and say, hey, we can't do this anymore. We're just not going to put our stuff on your platform anymore?
I think it is hard, because for artists, whenever you buy music, you want to make sure that you buy music from a record label or a source that pays royalties back to the artist. Anybody can go to YouTube, and you can get a YouTube to MP3 converter, and you can just take that video for free, but that artist isn't getting paid for it. So this is, definitely applicable to upcoming artists that are really, trying to get their music out there. If you like a band and they're on the upcome, make sure that you're supporting those artists by buying their music through, places where it pays royalties back to the artist. If you want to continue to hear them make great music, then you have to support them, and that's a really good way in doing so. But with your statement, I definitely agree with that. I think, artists are only getting, fractions of the dollar for their music that, as I mentioned earlier with the recording of a video, if it takes them, several hours to make one good track of a song, and they're getting fractions of the dollar on that artist is going to say, well, this is not worth it.
Yeah. You see that a lot. I see a lot more artists trying to make money doing other things, where they'll put out merch and they'll say, you know what, I'm done selling music. Some people give it away for free now. And they say, okay, well, if you want to help us out, you can buy our merch. You can buy this limited edition thing. You start seeing more limited edition items coming out. Right. That's not even just with music. That's with most things. Right.
And it used to be a time where bands would make the majority of their money on the purchase of records. Well, nowadays bands make money on their shows when they tour out. When people buy their tickets to go see them at a venue, that's how bands make money. They're not making money necessarily on their music as it once was. It's on the aspect of going to see them live in a concert.
And I feel like I explain this to many people that probably aren't in the music industry. They say, well, I don't really see the point in getting into music. Other than the fact, like, if I wanted to make a career out of it, they look at it and they say, well, you're not making money off records. Now there's Patreons, which are taking off. And it's something that I think not just bands should look into, but any kind of creative artist. You can make $1 off of one person a month, and it's not hurting them, but it's supporting you. And if you got 2,000 people doing that's $2,000 a month, where you can continue to doing your craft and actually live relatively easy.
Yeah,
while doing music.
I think Patreon. I don't have a Patreon, so I'm not really sure the logistics of how it works. But I am familiar with the aspect that you like pledge a certain dollar amount to that artist or that content creator. And I think that is a really good idea. It really helps put the support behind some of these artists that we really enjoy. I have several different YouTubers that I watch that do, music master classes weekly, and they do have Patreon pages to help support making content.
Now that is really important. I think that artists need to find another outlet where they can make some money, because they do deserve the money if they're putting in that much time. And I think you might even see a little bit of the death of the music label or the record label. So we are running low on time here. So I want to thank you for coming on. It was actually a really good time.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me. It was fun.
I'd love to have you on again if you can make the time.
Oh, most definitely.
So I will leave you guys off there. We are now on Stitcher. We are, I believe, on iTunes. So if you guys want to look us up there, we're on SoundCloud and YouTube. And this will be put up on YouTube, and we'll have all the links down below. So thank you guys for listening to today's podcast, and I will catch you guys later.